Yes, and with that, we're live, hopefully, coming to you straight from our offices at home. I'm in Amsterdam. Tom, you're in Berlin. Steve, you are currently not in the gazebo anymore, so that's nice.
No, I've come back into the house, so yeah, the noises have stopped.
Beautiful. And Olivia, all the way
San
from
Diego,
San Diego.
California.
Beautiful. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. If this is your first community office hours, both for attendees and our speakers, welcome. We have a lot of fun here. We talk about all things Terraform, especially normally on Terraform Thursdays, but in special weeks we have Terraform Wednesdays. So we'll just roll with it. I've got the team here that makes the Azure RM Provider for Terraform. Super excited to talk to you about your latest release, what you learned, and some cool features coming up. But before that, keep in mind that this is a professional space, so we do have a code of conduct. Some simple rules: be nice to each other, be kind. If you see something, say something. Don't call 911, just let one of us know. We have moderators standing by in the chat. And if there's anything that makes you feel uncomfortable, definitely let us know, because we want everyone to feel good here and free to ask questions. On that topic, let's do some introductions. Olivia, what do you do at HashiCorp?
Hello, everyone. I work with a lot of people, but my main focus as a product manager here is where Azure and Terraform meet.
I like this. This makes sense. Steve.
Yeah, returning kind of participant here. So I'm a senior engineer on the Azure Providers team. Most recently responsible for the app service rewrite, which I'm sure a lot of people have had some fun with. I hopefully got some really good use out of. So yeah, that's what I've been up to.
We should definitely talk about that in a bit. Tom, what do you do?
Yeah, hi. I'm also a former past participant. Anyway, I'm the engineering lead for the Azure Provider. So yeah, similar kind of all things Azure and Terraform and everywhere that intersects. So yeah.
Beautiful. So with that all out of the way, thank you for coming back. Welcome to your first office hours. What's new in the Azure RM land? I know you had a big release.
Yeah, we just go on, Olivia.
Oh no, I was just I was being like the hype man. We we did have a major release 3.0, which is really exciting, to which the whole team, it was a huge effort. And Tom and Steve and I have a lot to talk about here.
Well, actually, let's get right to it. Steve, I think you had some demos for us that you were going to show us through some features.
Yeah, I do. If we can get my screen up, if that's okay.
Yes, absolutely. Give me a second while we figure out technology.
Superb. Cool. Right. So what you're viewing here is the examples folder for app service within the provider repository. Those of you that have contributed previously may or may not be familiar with this. I'm currently stepping through all of the examples for the app service and updating them from the deprecated resources that were in 2.x through to the new resources which are in 3.0. Two of the things we want to show you today are this one in particular. So one of the new features that we added in 3.0 is this resource, which is a function app function. Prior to 3.0, it wasn't actually possible to kind of deploy functions directly to your function apps, but now this is actually a possibility. So this is a fairly basic configuration. We've got a resource group, storage account, a new service plan with standard variety for Linux. We've got a Linux function app for Python, because for my sins prior to joining this team, I was a Pythonista. And then we have a Azure function app. So What we've got here is two different ways of deploying it, and both of these are going to be left in the example, so you can pick and choose using two different functions in order to get the configuration in. By default, I'm going to be leaving the file in, so we can just actually source file directly from source. So that looks, in this particular instance, we've got the function JSON, which shows you the rendered JSON there. And we've got sample dat, which is the testing data that's used behind the scenes, and we'll ignore that because we don't need plugins for dat files. And you can stop asking. So yeah, so nice and simple, a little bit of a Hello World app. And if I just jump over to actually using this, there we go. And if we forget how to type, and we'll just use my history because it's easier. And if we then run that up, and you'll notice I'm YOLOing it because it's a demo. Excuse the provider overrides. This is actually released. The second demo is of something that's coming in the next release. So I'm running currently a build from actually straight out of main currently. And in a little moment, assuming my internet connection, because I'm on Starlink, is actually reliable. There we go. And off we go. So that'll take a little minute to deploy. As you can see, quite a lot goes into a default configuration for an app and a storage account. And there we can see the rendered kind of JSON for the app coming up. Down to the bottom. This takes about a minute. So it's not very interesting, I realized, to just watch watch one of these run past. I think you're on mute there, Kerim.
Yes, I was. We always do a double commit, you know, like disable your camera and disable the mic, just to be sure you don't say anything. So while we wait another 30 seconds for this to load, what's actually happening in the background? Can you give us some insights into that?
I was going to say, those familiar with Terraform and/or Azure should be fairly familiar with what's going on. We've got all of the resources that are defined in the configuration currently being provisioned behind the scenes. Function apps require a certain degree of pre-configuration. In fact, they need a resource group, they need a storage account in order to actually host the code into. And that's basically what's going on here. On top of that, this previously this particular example used to just provision the function app and then give instructions about how to get the function actually deployed via other means. Those other means are still perfectly viable, still perfectly possible. But we're just giving folks the option now to be able to define them directly in the Terraform configuration where appropriate as well.
So if I have existing code for this, I can still use that without any change, but if I want to live in the future, I should probably update.
Whether or not it's the future or whether or not it's right for your environment, we just like to give folks options. Okay, so we've got that built. So if I just flip over to here, hopefully this is, yep, here we go. So this is the deployed app. This is the one that we've just built. And if we go down to functions, we can see we've got the example function app here. And there we go. Come on, wakey, wakey. Previewed this demo earlier, and it was absolutely fine.
So
there we go.
Folks watching at home, if you're wondering if this is live, it is.
It really is. It's the nature of demos, isn't it? And so there we go. So there's the deployed function, and if we give it a, and there we go.
Beautiful.
Hello world as a function deployed exclusively from Terraform.
2 minutes from the time you hit Terraform apply to it being actually scheduled and running. I like it.
Yeah.
This is a very useful feature.
I think so. I was quite pleased to actually be able to get this in. This was it was fun. It was going to be difficult to do in the old world, shall we say, in the older resources. I mean, the whole purpose of the rewrite was App Service was one of the kind of first services introduced into the Azure provider back in the day. And as it evolved and grew over the years, the provider kind of kept up, but the number of changes of direction meant that it became quite fragile to make changes to. It was difficult to build on top of. So we took the painful decision to start again. And it was a monumental effort to get through, but it has opened up a lot of ability for us to do a lot of stuff like this, which is great.
Change is never easy, as we know,
Yeah.
but it feels like this feels very quick. And to me, I think that's what we all want. We want our infrastructure to be consistent, but most of all, very quick. I want to know if I messed things up. We should get a link up to the examples directory, not just for this one, but in general, the Azure RM Provider's examples have everything you can imagine. And with everything, I mean roughly 50 different showcases, which is all you need. So we'll get those up. In the meantime, we have a few people joining us. Hello, Drew and Shantano. Thank you for joining us. Drew had an interesting question. What's the difference between the Azure RM Provider and the AS API Provider? And I'll bring Tom and Olivia back for this one. If any of you want to take this one.
I can answer that. The Azure RM Provider is maintained by HashiCorp. It's an official provider. The AZ API Provider is a new provider that is supplementary to the Azure RM Provider. AZ API was created by Microsoft in order to bridge the gap, so to speak, at times, especially for supporting preview resources. It's not underlied by an SDK. It sits directly on top of the Azure APIs, and it uses just two generic resources for users to call any Azure API. So it doesn't offer the same robust experience that the Azure RM Provider offers, but it's meant to be a good supplement for resources that may not yet be supported in the Azure RM Provider.
Beautiful answer. I think Drew should be good with that. But if not, let us know in the chat. And if you have other questions, let us know. Thank you also, Lucky, for joining us. It's nice having so many familiar faces here and being able to answer these questions. Meanwhile, we put up the link to the Azure RM examples. And I'm sorry, I'm seeing chats that are very distracting. Head on over to those, enjoy what's there, and with every new release or as needed, new examples will be added. Steve promised that we'd have some more of the app functions. That is an interesting name. I have to say that. It's yeah, definitely triggers me. Also, this is the first time we actually have fans in here. So Tracy, welcome back. There's one for Steve as well. I guess Olivia, you didn't get to work with Tracy, otherwise you'd get a message too. There we go. Get the purple heart. That's all we want. See, this is a kindness that we need for office hours and work in general. It's a rough place. Sometimes your deployments fail. The world does not get better, and that happens. Meanwhile, if you have questions, keep them coming. We take this very seriously. But Steve, do you have a second demo that you want to show us?
Yeah, I do. Again, this is the reason that I'm on a kind of development build of the provider at the minute. This is something that's going to go out in the next release. After my faux pas last time I was on here, saying that we released every week, and then we had an technical issue that prevented us that week. I'm not going to say exactly when this one's going to go. I have learned my lesson. But in the next release, this one's going to ship. which is to say we've added the facility to do zip deployments into app service. So for those familiar with app service, if I get the right thing, this is, don't need sudo on there, get rid of that. This is analogous to a web app deployment with source config zip, for those that are familiar with the service and have used that before, which then allows us to now have a new property within the app service, which is zip deploy file. I point it at a configured zip file, which will use the Kudu backend, same as the ACCLI does, to actually deploy that as a working app. The README includes a link to the app that I've created for this purpose, for this example, so folks can try it out, download it. It is a super basic Python Flask app, absolutely nothing special about it, but it works. So if we, again, grab the console window and go into, and again, we apply with YOLO settings, and off we go. So same as before, we've got an app being built with the basics that's required for that. And for instance, resource group, service plan, and literally just a web app configured to runtime package. We're telling it that Kudu's got a deployment script to run. The details of that are in the repository that's linked in the README file, so folks can go and read that. And it will upload the zip file, deploy it, run the packaging, and hopefully just start the app. And this being a demo, I'm fairly certain something will go wrong, even in something as simple as this, because, you know, live broadcast, and that's what happens. So again, this takes about a minute, so I don't know if there's any questions, Kerim, that we could kind of field while we watch Terraform do its thing.
Not at this point, more a remark. Okay. So at some point, because of some dependencies with other resources, we end up writing destroy provisioners before destroying a resource. That's an interesting statement. I'm wondering if this is some kind of issue with the graph and something not being resolved correctly. I'm just throwing buzzwords at this.
Yeah, I'm not sure I quite get the context, but I suspect that, yeah, that's probably right. The dependency graph probably isn't being maintained, so there might need to be some references somewhere. I know Terraform 1.2 has got a new life cycle functionality in there to be able to nominate a resource on change to kind of recreate the local resource.
Yeah, the replace by triggers are huge for that.
Yeah.
In general, 1.2 has been a beautiful release so far. Post conditions, preconditions, add all the conditions. Okay, so we got a little bit of an update to that question while we wait for the web app to deploy.
Okay.
Oof, that's while we wait for that to deploy, let me summarize this. Actually, let me summarize it in the background while you continue your demo. It's going to be easier.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so we've got the zip deploy app set up now. And we've got a URL for it. So there we go. Well, this is Python Flask deployed, and it spits out a host name, which is obviously a really friendly name because it's a VM. The app has also got, in this particular instance, in case anybody wants to use it, we've got health endpoint, and for those that like to know these kind of things, we've got an uptime endpoint, which just shows you how long it's been since that particular process has started on the app service. So, like I said, really simple, absolutely nothing special to mention about what this app actually does, but it gives you a bunch of functionality that you can actually play around with, test with, and just works, which is great.
Way. It just works in my favorite way. In the meantime, we had a slightly shorter question, which is a little bit easier to answer right now. We're live streaming on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Twitch at this point. So if you're wondering where the questions are coming from, one of those three or from one of the back channels and see, I hope I pronounced that somewhat correctly, ask, is zip deploy available right now? Just curious, and how is zip deploy going to be more useful?
Yeah, zip deploy for the apps is going to come out in the next release. It's not available today, so the next release of the provider will include that. I merged it earlier on this week. So the usefulness there is the fact that if you have a pre-built artifact from your application, you can just kind of drop it into the location and use that, essentially use that as a trigger to for a Terraform run. But it's basically just enabling more workflows that are available to the end users. So I say if you've got a build process that creates an artifact, it can drop a zip file into a location. You can then use that as a trigger to start a Terraform run to redeploy your app. Zip deploys are up in there. So yeah, I mean, like anything that we add, it's all about giving folks as many options as possible to be able to do what fits for their environment.
So this is actually an interesting one, because you mentioned creating artifacts, and I'm thinking, could we use the archive file data source to create those zip files?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, provided that the zip file comes into a collection that Kudu can actually do something with on the back end, absolutely, not a problem.
Nice. Very useful. Beautiful question. And then Craig followed up on this one. Will the zip deploy work on the older Azure RM function app resource or only on the new Azure RM Linux function app and Windows function app?
Yeah, unfortunately, the older resources are now deprecated and feature frozen. We will not be making any more changes to those. The Linux and Windows variants are what we're going to be working on actively as things carry forward.
This is nice. So feature frozen. As somebody who maintains a lot of Terraform code, end user code, not the kind you maintain, I like when things are feature frozen because it sounds like I don't get to have a problem because things don't change.
Yeah, with the Belloc, I mean that is the intent of the deprecated resources. We keep them around so folks can carry on using them, and make the migration at their pace. But as a result, we do not add new features. We don't change the functionality of those things kind of going forward.
I think that is the most user-friendly way. Let's bring back Tom and Olivia, and we'll continue the demo a little bit later if we have the time. Tom, any other deployment methods we should be conscious about that we forgot?
Yeah, so one of the really nice things about zip deployments is obviously because you're not compiling the app when the app service launches or when the function app launches, it means you're dramatically reducing the start time. And as Steve mentioned, because it's going through your regular pipeline, you can unit accept and access that zip file as you need to, so you can confirm it's good to go, and then you get the benefits of a faster start time. There are other deployment methods available for app service, as Steve said. For example, like the Git deployment, and obviously Kudu has a bunch of other options as well. But yeah, it's as Steve mentioned, it's one of a number of deployment methods for app service, and it kind of allows you to mix and match as you need, depending on your environment.
I like this. Sounds like you're taking input from the user and making their life easier. There's a clear theme here. So I want to talk a little bit about the 3.x release. I think, Olivia, that's you. You had some slides that you...
I do have some slides, although it's all of us. And
I'll take all of you.
The work. Yes, let me share my screen.
While you get that up, we had a question come in from Sings. Will the TF exams ever be more aligned to Azure RM? As somebody who also works on the exams, I can tell you that our goal is always to have them be as generic as possible. We do rewrite them with new examples in mind, but we try to not be too provider specific, because your knowledge for Terraform that we're testing on the associate level should be applicable to all 2,000 providers, which is a tall order. Olivia, how's the slides coming.
I'm just picking the right screen.
The joy of live streaming.
Let's see.
Well, we have some time. Tom, what was your favorite thing about 3.0, sorry.
It's a bunch of little features, really. I really liked it. It's not even really a feature that we shipped. It's kind of just being more descriptive in the documentation for me for the features block. It's such a really valuable part of the provider for us to be able to say, here is, depending on your environment, we allow you to configure how the provider behaves for you. And in a similar manner, we have consistent availability zones now, consistent identity blocks. So it's a really nice, it's not that big a feature, but at the same time, it's a really big feature because it's consistency. And, the different Azure APIs and services behave as they need to behave. And the point is that we kind of make that standardized for you, which yeah, I think is like, it's not a massive feature, but at the same time, it's like a really valuable feature. So that's, that's my favorite.
Beautiful answer. Steve, how are you going to follow that one up?
If I'm honest, so much went into 3.0, it's difficult to pick. I mean, I did literally pour months of my life into the app service rewrite, so I'm kind of glad that that's out there now and folks are using it. I had some great feedback, some really helpful users out in the world, helping kind of work through scenarios, conditions, stuff that I'd never thought of. So for me, just kind of getting to work with community to get some of this stuff out there was absolutely fantastic.
Beautiful. Olivia, how was it for you?
This release was really exciting because there were a lot of provider-wide impacts and a lot of really huge resource upgrades. I may have to drop and come back to share the slides. It's like a permissions thing. If that's okay with y'all?
We'll make that happen through the magic of removing people from the stream.
There's one thing to call out, I guess, whilst Olivia's rejoining, which is that as a part of the 3.0 upgrade, we introduced both a beta, which we received some really valuable feedback on, but also an upgrade guide. And if I share my screen, this one, I think, hopefully that's coming through.
Yes.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
So we try and put everything in here. I'm sure there's a handful of things that we've missed, but yeah, our intention is that every change that's come in 3.0 is detailed in this guide. So whilst this is there's quite a lot here because it's a major release, the intention is that we call out exactly what's happened. So when you upgrade, you can determine exactly what changes are needed to your configuration. Some of these, as Steve mentioned, app service and function apps are enhancements to our new resources. Some of them are enhancements. So, for example, soft delete and recovery and purging for key vault nested items. Some behavioral changes. So one that's really nice now is if you try and delete a resource group that has something in it, by default now we'll raise an error or we'll raise a message and say, hey, there's still stuff in this resource group. Are you sure you want to delete this? And raise an error essentially. It's totally possible to opt out of that behavior as well, which is the really nice thing. And yeah, as I said, there's a bunch of changes listed in here covering, if I scroll down here, all the changes that have come in 3.0. And as I mentioned before, the features block allows you to customize the behavior of the provider. This is something we launched in 2.0. But as I say, we've done our best to kind of document and call out exactly what this does. So for example, for Key Vault now, there are a number of different options and behaviors that you can customize. So it's it's a really nice. Yeah.
We also shared a link for that upgrade guide in the chat. or look at the bottom of your screen. You can grab it from there as well. New phones will do OCR like that. Very cool. In the meantime, I think as an end user of this provider, the thing I like is that you're showing these options of basically having, this is how Key Vault works, or this is how this resource works. Because at the end of the day, one thing I notice a lot is we all expect Terraform to always work the same exact way, because it exposes similar language, no matter the provider. Sure, key values might change a little bit, but overall, we expect it to work the same way, except in the backend, in the API of the provider, things might actually be different. Your Terraform destroy might not actually destroy something. And sometimes that's a good thing, sometimes it's not. So definitely worth checking out those upgrade guides and the other guides in general, and go from there. So Jeremy, in the meantime, had a question for us. Can we talk about Terraform Lock HCL versus the required providers block? Both control the version of the provider and modules. Is one preferred over the other?
I guess I can take that one. So essentially, the required provided block is the recommended, well, is the way to define which versions of which providers you want to be using. The lock is actually it's like a checksum essentially to say, if I'm running Terraform on my machine, and somebody goes and runs it in Terraform Cloud, or like Kerim pulls it down and runs it on his machine, it ensures we're all running the same exact version of the provider binary, and that someone hasn't, for example, man-in-the-middled my download and is sending me like a random binary instead. So it's really a safety measure, the lock. We generally recommend that you commit those to source control, and there are, I forget the exact command off the top of my head, but there are definite ways, like there's a way of automatically updating the lock file, both to support multiple platforms if you have users on Mac OS and Windows or Linux, it depends, but yeah, it's nice. So the general, the associated thing to call out here is that older versions of Terraform let you define providers both within a module and at the top level. These days, I would say recommend, don't require, but we recommend you define them at the top level and pass them into modules. So it means you have a single place where those providers are defined, and then you pass them into the modules, which then use them as they need to. So yeah.
I like this answer. Checksum is indeed the perfect analogy. It also prevents you from accidentally grabbing a tainted version of a provider. Now with the Terraform registry, that's less likely to happen, but you can pull your providers from anywhere. The command, Tom, I think you were looking for was Terraform init-upgrade to update the checksums. But of course, at the end of the day, those releases are Git tags. And if an attacker comes in and removes the clean and safe 1.2.3 release and replaces it with one that backs up your Azure keys to somebody else's infrastructure, which is definitely not something we want, then having the log file committed would actually alert you to the change checksum. It prevents a lot of trouble, and that's a good thing. So definitely committed. And while you're at it, add the required Terraform version in there as well. And Camille range, it doesn't have to be 1.2.1, but in general, don't leave it up to Terraform to guess, because your colleague might be running 0.8 while you're running the latest and greatest. Your life is going to be different at that point. Bit of a detour from our standard topics, but version pinning is important. You might have heard me say that before. So in the meantime, Steve, you mentioned that we've gotten a lot of great feedback. How do people give us feedback for these things?
Well, obviously, through the actual provider project on GitHub is one way. So opening issues, get comments on there. We also have a Slack channel, which is detailed in the README on the repository as well, if folks want to join there. It's a great community of really helpful people, not just the team, but just generally Azure users are very helpful to each other. It's something that I've found incredibly useful throughout my career prior to kind of joining HashiCorp as well, because I was a contributor before joining, I think I've mentioned before. Just really helpful because it's a huge ecosystem, Azure. There's a lot that you can do with it. It can be kind of connected together in myriad different ways. So yeah, the community there is fantastic. There's a contributors channel as well for asking about how to help out, how to get resources done, to talk about PRs, talk about scenarios. So most of it has kind of come through those channels. There's a lot of DMs goes on there talking about individual problems. It's just a really great environment to be in, to kind of get help and help us carry the provider forward as well.
And I think that is a very good call out. It's there's the two of you and Olivia here today, but there's many more people that contribute to the provider. And thank you for everyone who's contributed. So in the meantime, let's see if we have a couple more questions come in. Tom, I'm actually wondering, do you have the other 3.x slides available?
I do not. He says, quickly checking. I don't think I do, unfortunately. I think we may be able to pull it from another place.
I'm sure we'll make it work, but for now, Tracy, thank you for sharing the link to the README and a little less Easter egg hunting for that Slack invitation. I do like that you two basically put it into a little bit of a challenge. Like, not everyone should be able to join. Like, you have to want it, because provider development is not for everyone. I want to say.
There's definitely.
There we go.
Go.
I was going to say, there are some contributor docs coming along soon to help folks out who want to get started. So those are on the way. I've realized for a lot of people they are possibly overdue. We do apologize. We've had a lot to do, but they are on the way. They are being written.
As time allows. This is definitely not easy. Welcome back, Olivia. We got Moise saying hi as well. So, yeah, while you're in the chat, let us know where you're from. Personally, I love having such an international crowd here. Like, we're like all the way over. It works. Meanwhile, Olivia, if you're ready, we've all been waiting and been very quiet for the past few minutes. Nobody said anything. It was super awkward. You know how Tom is. There we go.
Screen.
Yes.
Okay. New laptop, new me.
New laptop, who this?
Okay, let's see if I can control it. Okay, can you all still see my screen?
Definitely can.
Okay, great. All right, so as promised, we were going to talk a little bit about the major highlights of the 3.0 release. So we released this major version in late March of this year. The biggest provider-wide impacts, of which we had many, are here. So the first being we switched from AAD graph support to MS graph support. There are times that the Azure RM Provider used to call the AAD graph API. We've made it so now it calls the MS graph API in those occasions. And this is important that y'all are able to upgrade to 3.0 soon, because you all might have heard that Microsoft is going to deprecate AAD graph at some point. So you definitely want to be prepared for that. And before that happens, you'll also want to make sure that you've upgraded to at least the 2.0 version of Azure AD if you use that provider as well. The other provider-wide impacts that we want to talk about here are we're now checking for the validity of resource IDs upon import. So now you'll get an error if it's not a valid ID. And then lastly, safe resource group deletion was already available, but now it's on by default. So this is good for preventing the accidental deletion of resources that might fall under a resource group, but aren't for some reason managed or tracked by Terraform. For some of the resource upgrade highlights for this major release, the biggest of which we've already talked about a little bit, and Steve too, is the new data and resources for app service and function apps. So this was a really big lift, and Steve put in a lot of work into this. Basically, we wanted to have this resource set more accurately represent what is currently available in Azure, since it has evolved over the years. So you'll definitely want to migrate to the new resources when able, as the old ones are deprecated and will be removed in a future major release. We also now have Key Vault Soft Delete on a more granularized level, which means that Soft Delete is available for the nested items under Key Vault, being certificates, keys, and secrets. And then something that I'm sure Thomas talked about is the last thing, consistent availability zones across all resources. So it used to be that there is a little bit of inconsistency in this property behavior between resources and the provider, and now that should be consistent across all resources in the provider. And then another quick plug for those that use the Azure Stack Provider, which there might be a few of you watching. We're expecting a major release of this provider, the version 1.0, coming early June. So there's going to be a bunch of new resources and data sources, also some deprecations. There's a new service entirely, Key Vault, and we have some additional support items like custom timeouts and also resource ID validation here at import as well. And that's it.
Beautiful overview. We definitely get some fans with some of these features. Tom.
Yeah, there's one.
I was going to ask. I think we talked about this a while ago. There are definitely benefits to switching to MS Graphs, but I don't remember the exact scope of it all, for lack of a better word. Could you talk to that?
Yeah, so there are specific benefits for switching from Azure Active Directory to Microsoft Graph, which is the same source data behind the scenes. It's just a different API to interact with it. Yeah, essentially what Microsoft Graph allows you to do is it's more authentication methods, there's a tongue twister, for your organization. So if you want to say you can only log in to the Azure CLI on a machine that's bound to your Active Directory domain or with group policy or whatever else, you can enforce that, which means that when you use the Azure CLI in Terraform now, we will enforce via the Azure CLI whatever your organization's policies are. There are obviously different, it depends on your organization and that type of thing, but the point is that we now support that. So those features that are native to MS Graph, we now support from an authentication standpoint, which again, it's not like a massive feature, but some folks it really is, because it allows them to, to do that in environments where they need to. So, yeah. And that's supported across both the Azure RM Provider, Azure AD, so Azure RM in 3.0, Azure AD in 2.0, and Terraform Core in 1.2. So yeah.
Same experience everywhere. Consistency, I like it. Steve, you mentioned that we removed a couple lines of code. What are we talking about? What range?
No, added. The rewrite for app service was just shy of 50,000 lines of code over several months. So it was not a small undertaking to get that in there. It is an amazingly complex service.
So one might ask, do you enjoy the keyboard that you currently have, and what is it?
This is my second one now. But it's just a standard Magic keyboard. So, but yeah, I did get through them quite quickly.
I did enjoy how the blurring filter blurred out the keyboard, because we don't have the license to actually show that keyboard. But it has keys, so it's definitely a very, very good keyboard. And I want to say Pablo's message was exactly for the keyboard here. It must have been. So why don't we talk about container apps a little bit?
Me again then. Yeah, so it's a new feature, just been GA'd yesterday, I believe, at Build. It's we are adding support for into the provider, so we're hot on the heels of it this time. It's a breakaway from app service. It's been broken out of app service. It was formerly during the preview part of the app service RP. Which is possibly one of the reasons I ended up with it. All of that stuff gets funneled to me now. I'm a martyr for it, apparently. Yeah, so the container apps are, like I said, a new feature. It's a Kubernetes-esque facility that you can provide just a container to run on kind of shared infrastructure and just spin it up really quickly. We've got a few teething troubles with it for Terraform, as happens. It's a brand new service. The service teams have been kind of like working really hard to get it feature complete, ready for build, and we're just a little way behind them, but it is coming very soon.
Exciting. New features are always good. So in the meantime, we have about 10 minutes left. So a couple things to point out. If you're new to Terraform, if you're new to the Azure RM Provider, check out learn.hashicorp.com/Terraform for a host of tutorials. At this point, I want to say we're probably above 500. So no matter the use case you're thinking of, we probably have a tutorial for that. And if not, I promise you somebody's working on it. Also, if you're deeply passionate about writing those tutorials, we're hiring. Because those tutorials do not generate themselves, sadly. Or luckily, because there's actually a lot of human input needed. And then, let me see. Yes, thank you, Tracy, for getting this one in there.
We missed you, Tracy. We missed you, Tracy. Come back.
You heard it here first. Yes. So on that topic, the three of you are here, but how big is the Azure RM team on our side, on HashiCorp side? Because our community might be surprised if they don't actually know what the size of the team is, given your output of almost weekly releases.
Yeah, so there's 8 engineers on the team now, and yeah, Olivia from a PM side. So it's kind of 9 of us, which is kind of crazy growth-wise. So it's but that we also manage a lot of projects at the same time. So we have the Azure RM Provider, Azure AD, Azure Stack, and the Azure Backend, and then a whole host of supporting projects for that. So it's there's a lot going on.
So like 2 people per provider on average. It's if math works out today. Normally I'd use Terraform for that. It'd be much easier. Yes, Tracy, you put this very well. It's almost as if you're helping us advertise that we have open roles. We definitely do. Is your team hiring at this point?
I don't think we are at this point, but definitely stay tuned. We normally post in the repo, in the GitHub repository, sorry, when we are hiring. So yeah. Also, when we do major releases and things, so again, to kind of circle back to 3.0, one of the things that we did was to call out, I want to say 3-6 months ahead of time, that hey, we're not entirely sure what the features are going to be, but here's a high level of what we're thinking, to kind of A, get user feedback, and B, give folks a heads up as to what's coming. So yeah, definitely if there's a pinned issue, it's worth a look.
It definitely helps to have a heads up of what's coming down the pipeline, because that's the only way that you can actually prep your infrastructure for it. And it also allows you to make sure your stuff works when it comes down the road. So one thing that I liked was that you basically funneled features into the 2x branch, actually, while intending for it to be on 3x. How was that from an engineering perspective?
I guess I can take this. So honestly, I think it worked pretty well. We've actually done this for 1x to 2x, and I'll let you into a little secret. Before we shipped 3.0, so in a 2x release, we actually shipped a feature toggle for 4.0. So all the changes we're doing, all the breaking changes we're planning at some point, that approach is still there. But it's kind of worked really well for us. Both to be able to, in Steve's case, try out the app service resources, so we've been able to get feedback and customize, differentiate those, pick a word as needed, respond to feedback. There we go. And also to go through and do, code all of the deprecations that exist, because we, in some cases fields have been renamed, in some cases resources have been renamed. There's a lot in there. But the nice thing is that because it was feature flagged, we could then do, we could split that. So we could say, hey, there are changes that are going to be only in 3.0, like a one-way upgrade, and there is this beta. So, the changes, once we got to a point where it was ready, we could say, and we did, like, feel free to try the beta and give us your feedback and see how it went. And yeah, we had some really valuable feedback from that. So yeah, I would say it went well. Steve, Olivia?
I found it amazingly useful, as I've already mentioned. Just having the code there, and from our point of view, being able to run the two versions in parallel for test, because we do a lot of testing. I won't tell you what our Azure build's like, but it's very high. But we do an absolute ton of testing. So yeah, the ability to be able to do that and actually have that confidence was fantastic.
I'm curious
Go ahead.
If anyone here watching used the beta.
Yeah, if you use the beta, let us know in the comments, because that would actually be very interesting. And let us know how your experience was. Meanwhile, we're getting close to the end of today's office hours, but roughly a month from now, actually less at this point, we'll have HashiConf Europe again, this time taking place in Amsterdam. If the tickets haven't sold out, you definitely want to get on that and get yourself a ticket. Otherwise, we're also streaming it virtually, so you can join from the comfort of your own home and enjoy probably not as nice coffee, but that's okay. Except for Tom, I know you'll have great coffee available.
I think it's something everybody on the team appreciates. It's yeah, definitely valuable.
Coffee is what actually builds providers, right? At this point. So yeah, I know there's more exciting stuff coming down the road, so I'm looking forward to welcoming you all back when we're at a stage where we can discuss that. In the meantime, thank you all for joining us and for giving us some nice demos. Doesn't happen a lot, but demos are great. Demos, especially that work live, is to me a testament of how well this provider is built. Yes, we expect it to work live. It does not always. But we learn from that. So with that, any closing words, Olivia?
I want to thank everyone for your contributions and your interest in the providers and for keeping us honest and at the cutting edge.
That is definitely a good sentiment to echo. Tom, closing words.
Yeah, pretty much the same. Like, thank you for being active in the community. Thank you for giving us feedback. It's really valuable, and also thank you for contributing and using it every day. It's yeah, it really helps. But yeah, if there's things that are particularly that are of particular interest, like, it definitely helps to give thumbs up on issues. Just so we can look at them that way. But yeah.
The +1 reaction is definitely the way to go. There's no need to post a +1 comment because that makes the bots unhappy. And if you've watched season 3 of Love, Death, and Robots, then you know you don't want the bots to be unhappy.
Oh, that reminds me, one thing I forgot. So I actually have an open door policy for everyone working with or using the Azure providers. I have a pinned issue pretty much at all times on the Azure RM Provider that allows you to click a link and sign up for a short session with me to talk about your experience with the providers. So I welcome everyone's feedback in that way.
Feedback is important. It helps us create a better product. If you don't tell us what you expect the provider to do, then we might build what we think the provider should do. And those two things might not actually be the same exact end result. So let us know. The issue, we'll get a link to that issue up in the show notes as well. And Steve, for you.
Oh, I'm actually okay now. Sorry, my cat is recovering from surgery just over there, and it was just being very noisy for the last few minutes. Thankfully, it's been quiet now. Yeah, just to echo the previous statements, kind of keep the feedback coming, help us out. The community around Azure, certainly around the Azure providers, is something like a scratch record. It's fantastic. So yeah, just keep it coming. Keep helping us out, folks. We really appreciate it.
Takes a village. We're grateful for your input, but I'm personally also very grateful for the 3 of you and the rest of your team. And with that, we're at the end of today's community office hours. Join us back next week for more Terraform and also Nomad, possibly, or the other way around. We'll see how it goes. Check us out on youtube.com/HashiCorp or wherever you stream. And Tom, this is for you. Make sure to like and subscribe. And with that, have a great rest of your day, morning, evening, or night.